started. We will get started, and welcome to the September 2022 meeting of the Houston County Historical Society. We will start off with the pledge to the flag. Mr. Brown, if you will lead us to the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Always wants to see where everybody else is.
We have a new year coming up next year, and Jackie and Leah have agreed to be on the nominating committee. And I haven't asked Minetta, but I'm sure she would too, to make sure if you all would like to serve, the ones that are serving this year, or if there's some of you that are not serving and would like to, we would love to have you on board. The dues are $10 per household per year and $50 per household per lifetime. Meeting minutes. Everybody receiving their minutes? It should be. Okay. Is there any question or concerns about the minutes? If there's no questions, we will deem the minutes approved. Treasurer's report, Ms. Leah.
In the last month, we had almost $700 in income, in expenses. We did pay for the maps. No, I'm sorry, I got that back. I apologize, I've been at it all day. We had almost $700 of income and just over $700 of expenses. The balance of the checking account is $2,844.40, and the balance of the CD remains the same at $11,378.99. We have $92.07 left to purchase artifacts for the archives, that we give to the archives. And we've allocated from tracking the brick account, there's $624.40. It's my understanding, Vanetta asked me about it, that money will get turned over to the city of Erin because they're going to take over the brick walk in the park. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Any questions? We will deem the treasurer's report approved. Old business. As you might know from your last minutes from last month, I got in touch with Vanetta James today, or she called me, about the brick account. And she told me that the city of Erin will take over the brick project. Angie Nielsen is the contact person there. Vanetta will transfer the new brick orders to them. She says there's a few in the basement, a few bricks in the basement that need to go to them, and along with the money that will be transferred to them, and the accounting that we had people ordering who has blocked it.
There's only one outstanding order that I'm aware of, and it's for 2 bricks from Mr. Robert Brown.
Yes, she did mention that. Okay, old business. Well, since I'm talking about Minetta, we will call this old business or new business, whatever you want to call it. Miss Alice Miles had some prints available years ago. Minetta has the original print of the old courthouse, if any of you have seen it. It will be on display at the fair this week, the original. There are prints available at archives for $50 each. And she also mentioned some prints that Miss Miles did, 88 Steps of Knowledge. The location of those prints right now is, we have 2. We will get a price from Vanetta if she remembers, and okay, I'll let you talk to that.
I'll see her in the morning.
Okay. And old business, Donald or Jackie, do you want to give an update on the World War II project?
Well, we're getting ready to crank up on it. As always, we need everybody's help. If you have any World War II veterans, any families, we'd love to have the information. We're going to start trying in the next week or two, trying to decide where we're going to have it, the date when we're going to have it, and sort of a recap of what we're going to try and do on the program, and maybe do some stuff in the schools. But that's about where we're at. But we just need everybody's help. Any information you've got, just please share it with us.
There's 1,400.
Yeah, there was over 1,300 on Leah's
Plus-
list, and we'll find.
$13.99 to go.
Well, yeah, probably. No, we've got several to go on that thing. We've probably got, I don't know what, Jackie, 75? And Leah's been very helpful, Susan. It's just been, we've had a lot of help to this point, but we need everybody, if they will, to share their information where we can archive it and have it for future generations.
And this project is based on the Robertson County book that they had for their veterans, which was phenomenal. There was a picture, there was information on the soldier, everybody had their own page. It was really an undertaking for them, and it will be for us too. Steve, would you like to talk to the members here?
Well, Stewart County did a World War II thing too, and we haven't done it in a book like that. We've done a book, we took the transcribed interviews with them, and we've got that out, and it's 2 volumes, and it's $40 for that. And it's Stewart County people, but you know, there's a lot of home front stories in there too. But I think this is a great idea here, and I'd like to see the Robertson County book about it. I haven't seen it, but I know of it. So.
You need to visit the archives.
I've been up there, and they were closed. So, it's archives or historical site?
Anybody that has not seen that.
Archives or historical site?
Archives.
Huh? Well, I've been there one time and they were closed. I hadn't been back, so I just need, you know.
Downtown, that's kind of generic.
Yeah, downtown, okay.
Downtown.
Okay, I know where that is.
Okay.
And then other things is about, our Stewart County meeting is, we've got 2 of them coming up October, oh, wait a minute, I guess I can get back on the other page, that's where it is. September 27th, we got a show and tell. And it starts at 6 o'clock in Stewart County. And it doesn't have to be something from Stewart County or anything, but we've never done one in several years, so we're trying to show and tell. I got something from World War II that I'm showing, that I got from a guy she was dating at the time, so I'm trying to find out more information about that. And then October 25th, we got a Native Americans program, and it's about a guy who makes bows. And he's coming to do that, so, and it starts at 6 o'clock also. And then I got a flyer here, anybody's welcome to one of these. It's John Walsh's Civil War relic show and display. You can purchase it or you can just look at stuff, and it's going to be October 1st and 2nd at the Stewart County Visitor Center, and it's full. That room is full, and we're actually going to the other side now and doing some stuff there too. So. And one of the things, Stewart County is probably going to be there selling some of the history books, and we're trying to get Johnsonville, Nathan Bedford Forest State Park, and other places, Fort Defiance, to come have a table there too, talk about that stuff too. So Eastern County's got a table they want. They can sell the maps and books. I'm okay with that.
Ski, what was that, what was the date was that bow guy?
25th of October. It's Mike Heck, and he used to work for Tennessee National Wildlife Refuge, how I knew him. And I think everything's set for that. I'm looking forward to it. I've watched his program before. It's a good, he's done well for the refugees before. So.
Thank you, Ski.
Thought of something else too. What was it? I don't know. I'm going to think of it later.
Where is your archives located right now?
It's still in the old elementary school next to the library.
Any date for?
No, we're going to be there probably several months, I think, yet. But we are moving supposedly to the basement of the visitor center. It'll be a little bit better for the records. I kind of want to stay where we're at. I'm used to it, but you know, but it didn't work. So it's good, and everything seems to be still on schedule for that. So.
Does anybody else have any announcements before we let our archivist talk and introduce our speaker? Turn it over to Melissa.
I'm Melissa Barker. I'm the Houston County Archivist and Records Manager. We are located in the basement of our courthouse, and we have exhibits and displays, so please come and check us out. I'd like to try to give an update. We've had lots of stuff donated recently. We had some photographs from the Culver Shoe Picnic and Christmas Party from the 1950s donated. A lot of those are not identified. One thing about the Culver Shoe Company, if many of you will remember, that it burned in 1974. So we don't have a lot of records, photographs, and things from that business. And as you know, the Archives is trying to document every business that was ever in Houston County since 1871. We have received some other photographs and documents. Susan Knight Gore, some of you will know Susan Knight Gore. She's the archivist at the Cumberland Presbyterian Church Archives in Cordova, Tennessee. And she is an eBay stalker, and she found a couple of letters on eBay for a Mr. Lewis, lived on Woolworth. It actually was said Erin, Tennessee, but it's right on the line, Humphreys County and Houston County. So she sent those to us in the 1930s. And Mr. Gary Booker brought us this. This is a gun holster. This gun holster, Mr. Gary Booker says, belonged to Mr. Eric Washer. That is Ann's grandfather. Gary, can you tell us about this?
Well, the only thing I can tell you that Gilbert Nichols was an assistant with Mr. Guy that owned the Scalbert, and he handed it to Gilbert. Now, where the pistol went, I don't know.
What kind of pistol was it? Do you know that?
Do you know what kind of pistol he carried?
I imagine it was probably a .38 revolver.
Okay.
Brand name, probably Smith & Wesson.
Okay. So I have people all the time asking me, what kind of stuff do you take? And we literally take everything because we're the only place in Houston County collecting this kind of stuff. And to save our history and to preserve it and to tell the stories. So, like I said, we even take gun holsters that we'll put on display. So, I'm sure our guest, our speaker tonight needs no introduction. I'm a huge fan of hers, Dr. Minoa Uffelman. She's a professor at Austin Peay State University. She is a hometown girl, and her books are phenomenal. And so she's going to come to us tonight and talk to us about the Diaries of Serepta Jordan. I've read the book. It's awesome, especially since I researched a Civil War veteran of my husband's who enlisted in Palmyra December 3rd, 1861. And in November of 1862, he was captured in Clarksville. So reading those days, around those days, was very exciting for me. What was going on? So, yep.
I am pleased to be here. Some of you have heard me, and we can turn the lights out so
Yes.
we can get a better image.
Okay. Yes.
So, some of you have heard me talk about Nanny Haskins, which came out about 8 years ago, and in this very room, I talked over in the Historical Society, I talked about Nanny. So Nanny was a 16-year-old, and she was elite and well off, and her story is very different because women in the Civil War on the home front, wherever they were in their stage of life, in their economic status, determined what their life experience was going to be. So Serepta Jordan is very, very different from Nanny Haskins. They were young women who probably lived about 4 miles from each other. The one lived in downtown Clarksville, and one lived across the river in New Providence. And back then, well, today still, there's a divide between the city of Clarksville and New Providence. And local Clarksville people sometimes look their nose down in New Providence, and some of that class friction comes out in her diary. So New Providence was this bustling merchant town, Serepta surrounded by people who work for a living. They're not well off. Whereas Nanny her daddy was a doctor, and she was. If there was somebody important in town, a professor or a minister, they were all in their same social class. But this is Serepta Jordan, and we'll just go to the next one. What I'm going to do is, these slides give a really big overview of the diary. The diary is so comprehensive with so many subjects. I thought I would give a big overview of what's going on in the diary, and then we can, at the end, take questions and see which part you are interested in and what you might want to talk about. So, Serepta was born in 1839 and died in 1894. it was, her father died. It was kind of a mystery, and Melissa can tell you this, when you're doing archival research, you're at the mercy of what documents got saved and what documents didn't get saved. And back then, there were not a lot of birth certificates or death certificates, and there certainly was, so you had the census records and those kind of things. So we know that Serepta's father was dead, but we didn't know when or anything. Well, then, a little bit before publication, the Montgomery County archivist, Jill Hastings, was doing some probate records in Robertson County, and she found the probate records of Serepta's father, his will, leaving money for her to get an education. So we knew she was very well educated, but we did not know where, how. We still don't know where she was educated, but he left money for tutors and things. So we do know that. Her mother was named Maris Trice, and there are a bunch of Trices. So the archival evidence of Trices is all over the place. So there were several, and if you're familiar with Montgomery County, there's a place on the river called Trice's Landing. That's the same family, or at least one branch of the same family. And then some of these Trices, they would name each other the same names over and over and over, so it was kind of confusing to get everybody straight. But Damaris married. She was a widow with a baby, or a young toddler at least, and she married a man named John Bennett, and Serepta actually went by Rep. Everybody that knew her and loved her called her Rep. So when she was 7 years old, her mother married John Bennett, and they moved to Kentucky. Well, then she had 3 more kids, and then she died. So here she is, orphaned with a stepfather and half-siblings. And for some reason, we don't know why, but she leaves that home and she goes to live with her deceased mother's sister, a maternal aunt. And that is in New Providence. And it's interesting, the 1850 census actually captures Serepta with the Bennett family in Kentucky. And a few months later, the census taker got her in Montgomery County with her aunt and uncle. And the name of their cottage was Aspen Cottage in New Providence, and it was very close to Trice's Landing. The uncle had lots of businesses. His name was Elsie, and the aunt's name was Tabitha, and she called her Aunt T. And she simply adored and loved her Aunt T. Okay, this is what the diary looks like. So the story, the provenance of the diary is pretty interesting. The family lived in New Providence for generations, but then they were about to sell the property and they found this diary in a smokehouse. So somebody probably just didn't have room for it and put it out there. But 100 years after the Civil War, we don't know how long it was in there, but 100 years after the Civil War, the diary was found. Well, the great-granddaughter had it and really wanted to get it transcribed and published. And her name was Evelyn Hunter, and she eventually, so this was in the 80s, and then in the 90s, she donated it to the museum. And Evelyn attended First Presbyterian Church, and all the elderly ladies of First Presbyterian Church that were friends with Evelyn, they helped transcribe this. They spent, that whole Sunday school class, they just did it all the time. So she worked on the diary, she worked on the diary, she worked on the diary. Then a woman who's from Clarksville named Aunt Allie, and she was at Austin Peay when I was getting my master's, and she is a retired, she just died last year. She was retired, she worked at TSLA. Melissa, you would overlap with her. So she worked on it for 15 years, but then her health got bad, her husband's health got bad, he died. At age 84, what she had worked on, she gave it to me because she liked what I'd done with Nanny, so she trusted us. Somewhere in the middle, oh, and I was going to tell you, Aunt Allie has a Houston County connection. Her son is married to a Houston County girl. Her name is Melody Ellsbrooks, and she's my sister Natalie's age. Maria, do you remember who Melody's Melody's daddy was? Mom and Natalie remember he died.
He farmed tobacco. Melody graduated in '81. She has brothers. One of her brothers passed away several years ago.
So that's the
I'm
Houston.
gonna think about it.
Yeah, think about that. And then Charlie Hulk, as Austin P professor, he worked on it, and they tried to get it published, but the press said, well, there's not quite enough footnotes, and Charlie Hulk got mad and took his ball and went home. And he, as an English professor, he thought he footnoted it enough. Well, he was wrong. So then the museum, oh, and this is part of the story too, because a young woman at the museum got a big grant from the government, from the state government, and they sent the diary to a place to be conserved in Boston. So it's really cleaned up. So this is it. It's a big, huge journal, big, thick binders, and the weather pretty much destroyed. Well, if it hadn't been for the big, thick binders, we wouldn't have the works. So they couldn't save the binders at all. They couldn't fix them. But because of the binders, they serve their purpose. So it's big and heavy. And so this woman, she worked so hard from sun up to sundown. She was so busy, and I just envisioned her. She wrote this every day. So when we got it, all these people have been working on it for about 30 years. And somewhere along the way, the editorial process, someone decided that the diary would be published from the first entry that said disunion, thinking that only the Civil War part of the diary was interesting and that's all anybody would want to read. Well, those of us who took over the diary, we could not disagree more. We thought what happened before the war was just as interesting as what happened after the war. And of course, I think what everyday life was like, is also just as fascinating. So, that meant we added about 100 pages. Well, the press said, yeah, we can publish all this, but nobody can afford it. So they wanted us to take out about 100 pages. So we did, and we spent 2 summers working on it. Three or four editors, whenever we were working, we agreed that we wanted to keep the continuity of the diary. We wanted to keep the same balance of war news, everyday news, neighbor news, community gossip, politics. We wanted to keep the same balance, because editors can really change the diary. If the editor chose only to put the Civil War stuff in, like somebody wanted to, then the diary wouldn't reflect what Serepta's her life was like. And she wrote like everybody does. You write something important, and then you say what you had for supper. You write something important, and you say, I went to visit so-and-so. So it's all there in the pages, one right after another. But this diary she's smart, she's educated, she's well-read, and I got ahead of myself. It took all 3 of us to agree to delete something. So we would discuss what to delete, and we all 3 agreed before we would delete it. So, and that's why I apologize to everybody that's bought a book. $45 is the cost of the book. That's what it costs. It just costs that much. And paper's expensive now and all that stuff. So here's some of the main themes. She talks about everyday life, and everyday life she talks about food, growing food, preserving food, cooking food, how she did it, all her labor. She sewed like nobody's business. And she's sewing underwear, and she's sewing stuff for the slaves, and she's sewing stuff for her husband. She's making pretty things as well as functional things. She's interested in fashion, so she tries to get like magazines from the north that tell what the newest fashions are. So that's interesting to me. She also spends several entries talking about the first agricultural fair in Montgomery County, and that tickled me to no end because I have a leg in ag history. I go to the ag history conference, and we're having a fair this week, right? Maria, you got your honey over there?
Yep.
All right. So, the fair is pretty interesting because it was just this collaboration between business, the city, businesses, the city, political leaders, the county leaders, and everybody, and it was this big, elaborate, and they had prizes and competitions, and everybody was anybody win. And it was supposed to be annual. Well, it was in 1860. All that groundwork, all that foundational work, gone. So there wasn't gonna be another fair for like 20 years. And plus, probably a lot of people who attended ended up dying. So that's in there. Gender roles, she's not very positive about marriage. She's pretty negative about marriage. And she has a lot of interesting observations about neighbors in their marriage. And religious life, every Sunday's entry was the same. She went to church. She commented on the sermon, whether it was good or bad. They ate a big dinner. They took a nap, and then they visited that night. That's what every single Sunday was like. So she records her opinions of all the ministers that she attended. Political conflict is in there. Military camp life, that's fascinating because she's really close to the camp. Preparations for war. Then, of course, after Fort Donelson fell, Clarksville was occupied. She talks about occupation and the fear at the beginning, the violence at the beginning. And then I think my favorite part of the whole diary, one of my favorite parts, is the breakdown of slavery. So in real time, she's talking about her uncle's slaves, and she actually owned one slave. Even though she was not a wealthy woman, her uncle had given her a slave who was named Inez. And in the beginning of the diary, first time I read it, I'm just reading along thinking, oh, she and Inez, I thought they were friends. And all of a sudden I realized, because they're working together, they're not friends. She's a slave. And then I keep reading some more, and I realize she's a child. She's like 6. So it was just an eye-opening experience. So you get, she has affection for Inez, but she still owns Inez. She sees that Inez gets a vaccination, which that's surprising. I guess that was one of the biggest surprises in the book, that she made sure that her slave got a vaccination. She brings in the doctor when Inez is sick. But at the end, when Inez is getting a little bit too big for our britches, they're beating. They're repeatedly beating her. And then finally she does leave. So you get that in real time. There's a couple of other really harrowing stories about the end of slavery. Next one. So this is what the diary looks like. By the time we got it, it was pretty much transcribed, but one of my co-editors, she went to the archives, or to the museum, the archives in the museum, and she took a photograph of every single page. So she checked the transcription that had already been done, and she filled in all the gaps. And she's like, that's her superpower. So you can see there's water damage, so in some places there, and there were a few places we couldn't make out the letters because of the water damage. But she wrote the diary every day from January 57 to June 64. And perhaps she had other diaries after this, but they have not survived. But maybe they're in an outhouse somewhere and we will eventually get them, because this was certainly a surprise. So this is when they were about to send the diary off to Chicago. We went in and took pictures of it. You can see it's big. It's a big, big, hefty diary. So there are a lot of tragedies in her life. Her father died. then her mother remarried and her mother died. And then she's gonna have a couple of male friends who visit her regularly in the beginning of the diary, and they come see her quite often. And one of them dies in the war, and the other one goes away. Then her beloved Aunt Tabitha dies, and that's a whole story I'll tell you in just a second. And the uncle, she's not even cold in her grave, and the uncle starts courting a widow woman up the road, and he marries the woman up the road, and now the new wife doesn't want Serepta in her house. So it's a very unwelcoming place for Serepta. And she leaves, and I'll tell you in a second where she goes. So these are the two guys. We don't have any photos of them when we look. Tom Trobe and John Mallory. And she talks about them visiting. She talks about them talking, but she doesn't say what they said. So she's right. But when she gets word that he dies, she's very, very upset. And then John Mallory, he goes to war. He seems to have survived the war, but there is a little bit of evidence he may have died in 1866. Okay, this is who she marries. His name was B.B. Homer, Leighton Beverly Homer. He was about 20 years older than she. He was a widower with one daughter. He was a businessman. He was somehow related to the Trice families by marriage, and he wanted Serepta. He was there every single night. And he pushed her to marry him, and she never talked about loving him. But when her uncle remarried and she was in this hostile house, she married him. She married him. And I contrast that with Nanny. Nanny married a man 20 years older than she, but she had a happy marriage. So, okay. This is in the family. The family thinks that the one on the left is Serepta, and then the one on the right, which is very faded, is Aunt Tabitha. So that is still in the family. Now this is pretty amazing about this diary, because I don't know of any other diary where there's a diary and then there's all this other belongings that have survived. So her descendants kept her memory alive. And not only that, they had this dress and they had some of her belongings. And the great-great-granddaughter said they used to play dress up in these clothes. So Serepta would have sewn this, and she was a tiny, tiny little woman. They had to, the styrofoam mannequin had to be cut down so that the dress would fit it. She made some of the hats that have survived, so she would have made these hats. She was interested in fashion. I thought this quote was interesting. She goes, "I'm so sorry tight sleeves are becoming so fashionable. Homely wrists and strong arms will suffer. And if hoops are entirely abandoned, what will we do?" She also talked about hats, and I looked it up. I didn't look at anything, but she talked about somebody making a Jeff Davis hat. So the Southern women started wearing this particular kind of hat, and so she made one of those. Then she made this. She said, "I made myself a pair of indispensables," and this is a. Now I'm getting confused. I can't remember if the indispensables or the underwear, but this is called a reticule. And that's what I've got on here. A Victorian term for reticule, which is a fabric drawstring bag used as a purse. So the photo's not great, but it's got tatting on it, it's got embroidery on it, and she has this shawl that she made. So all these are in the museum. She was very religious. She would write notes in books. Here's what she wrote about a sermon preached by Bishop George Foster Pierce at the Methodist Conference. His sermon was excellent, his delivery good, his style easy and calculated to attract the attention of the congregation. So he came out okay. Not all of them did. This is in the family's possession. These are her books. They have her name in them, and they often have her notes in the margins. And they are big tomes. They're like the history of philosophy, the history of Napoleon, the history of the world kind of book. She was well read. And this is a drawing taken from the photograph we'd seen earlier. So this is hanging in the descendant's house. This is her later in life with her 3 daughters. So at the end of the diary, published diary, she talks about being married, and then she talks about being sick. And then I'm reading along, and I'm thinking she's sick. And then she says, and then I had a baby girl named Teddy. And I just about fell out of my seat because she wasn't exactly sick, she was in labor. So she named her oldest daughter Tabitha. And then she had another daughter named Evelyn, which she named Eva, and another daughter named Jamie. And we have since learned, somehow we learned that there was a son, Bailey. Well, I know how we found it. We found his headstone, his tombstone. Because he died at age 2, but he died between the censuses, so he was never even on the census. But this is her later in life. Her husband, she lived about 20 years after her husband died. So this is the picture she lived with Eva and Eva's husband, Christopher Smith. So they seem to have a little bit of money, nice big house. Then they lived in this house. The final years at Oak Top with her daughter and his family. And this is a program from when she died. She died September 25th, 1894. She was only 55. And I actually have that card. And then she's buried in the family cemetery in Greenwood. Serepta and BB are buried with her daughter Eva, Homer Smith, and their family. And this is the book. Thank you for attending. And I'm going to show you the risque one at the end. Okay, one more. This is the day the book came in the mail during the shutdown. I put on my mask and I ran in and got a bottle of champagne. I was pretty happy that day. So that's the overview. So if you want to, let's go back to Serepta's photo or the drawing of her, and then I'll just see if there's anything in particular you all want to ask.
Didn't you do a program for Montgomery County Historical Society or somebody did, and the 3 granddaughters came?
Yes, it was the Woodward Society, the Friends of the Library version of the Austin Peay Library. And we had we were their speaker for their big banquet. So when the book was coming out, it was iffy when the book was coming, and I kept putting off the Woodward Library about, it needs to be the end of April, it needs to be the end of April. And then they put it at the end of April, and then COVID hit, and we didn't have it. So 2 years later, we had it. And we had a big turnout, and 2 of the great-great-granddaughters came. So they were there. They're very happy that we did this.
Who are the great-granddaughters? What's her
Maria,
family
what
name?
is her name? They're with First Presbyterian Church, and one of them is a retired teacher. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but I will tell you more.
Where's the journal kept today?
It's at the museum in Clarksville. It's not in the archives, it's in the museum. It's in the Customs House Museum. And now that it's all cleaned up, kind of under lock and key. So they don't want people touching it, as you can imagine. But I doubt if many people will want to go in there and see it, because we've published it. We've done the work. So,
The 100 pages you had to take out, did you put that in another book sometime?
well, it's really not interesting stuff.
Okay.
It's like, first thing that went were things like, well, I haven't written today, but nothing exciting happened. That's the first thing that went. When her Aunt Tabitha died, she just poured her heart out in grief. And it went on for page after page after page after page. And we left like a couple of pages in, but we took out like 3 pages. It was very repetitious, and she was just heartbroken. So what we took out, we felt like it would not hurt the book. I've got it on my computer. So, hear me.
I have a couple of observations. I really, really, really like how when a new character or a new person that she wrote about was introduced, and in the notes, you said this is probably, and you would say the family or the person from the census bureau. So I really like that. And then secondly, you know, I was very surprised by how much visiting was done by her and others, and they would just drop in, and, you know, today, we would, you know, you call ahead, you say, hey, you're gonna be there.
And they're all within walking distance.
Yeah, they walk
And we
everywhere.
think of not a lot of communication back then, but in the New Providence, they were right there in the thick of things. They visited all the time. They were on the river, they were on the rail lines. They got newspapers from the north when they could. They were at the center of town. There was a lot of communication. They witnessed newly freed slaves getting on the barges to go north. They're seeing all this. They're seeing the newly, the U.S. colored troops in uniform and acting, I mean, they're seeing all this stuff. It's right there because it's within walking distance. Let me tell you, then I'll get to this today, but let me tell you about her aunt died. So, the Clarksville boys are being called up to form the unit to go off and fight for Confederacy. And they're having a big, huge send-off. And there's a picnic, band, and all the stuff. And it's a celebration, a patriotic celebration to send them off to war. And they're all there, and the aunt drops dead at the party. She has a stroke. They run to get the doctor. The doctor's too drunk to do any good. Not that he might have done any good anyway, but that's how she died. It was very public. And then in the newspaper, the little notice in the newspaper said, the wife of Elsie Trice died. Didn't even have her name. It was the wife of Elsie Trice. Dead.
I'm curious about, as a professor teaching history, how are you dealing with the issues in this book and otherwise with the history of people being enslaved? And there seems to be a lot of discussion now about, you know, how much truth we can stand about our past history. Is that part of this book too?
I have had no pushback, and I'm just teaching like I've always taught, and I teach the facts, and I'm backed up by primary sources. So I have had no pushback. We'll see if that continues, because a lot of people don't like learning about stuff. But it's a fact of life. It happened.
She was a Confederate sympathizer.
Oh, yeah, she was Confederate sympathizer.
How
But,
did she-
okay.
How did she accept the blacks after they were free? How did the
Well, the
civil-
diary ends in 1864, so I don't know. But I will tell you this, they, as much as the Confederate sympathizer as she was, they sold merchandise and produce to the Union Army.
Yeah.
So they made money that way, and her slave worked with her, and they would sell butter and milk and eggs to the fort And the irony of all irony is, after she married Homer, apparently they were kind of cash strapped, and they took in a boarder. Well, the boarder they took in was a white sergeant for the U.S. Colored Troops. So he was in the U.S. Colored Troop unit, and that was her boarder. When we found him, that was a happy day when we found him. So, yeah, you can talk about being a Confederate sympathizer all you want, but when it comes to being hungry, you're gonna sell your produce to who you need to sell it to. And to do business, they had to take an oath to the U.S. government, because they were under occupation.
The book itself, what was its original purpose? It looks like it's about 3 inches thick. Was it a ledger?
It was a ledger. It was a store ledger.
And how does it compare to the Nanny Haskins book that she used for her diary?
Nanny's is in TSLA down in Nashville, and it's just a small one. And I've held it a few times, but we were using microfilm on that. So it's much more of a traditional diary. Okay, somebody else back there?
Yeah.
In the dark?
Is there anything left of
Yeah,
any
we can
of,
turn them on.
is there anything left of any of her homes where she lived in New Providence?
No, Aunt Allie told me once she knew where Aspen Cottage was, but it's no longer there. Yeah, I think the big brick building that she lived in at the end of her life is still there. Because that's a modern photo.
Yeah.
We don't know, and we looked and looked and looked and looked. We looked for Inez. Because we looked, maybe she took their last name, and maybe she's on the, so Inez was maybe 9 or 10 when the war ended. So she, hopefully she had a good life. At least she was free. Yeah, so we don't know. And we couldn't find any Haskins slaves either. We tried. We just lost to the written record. We only know what's left, don't we, Melissa?
Right.
And what people donate.
That's right.
Well, thank you.
Minoa has her books for sale. The Nanny Haskins is if you're interested. And please note that your next meeting, October the 11th, at 7 o'clock here, will be Susie Askew and a program on mapping White Oak Creek. November, please note that that is a third Tuesday because of the election at the archives. Melissa will be hosting us with light refreshments. Okay. So that will be at 6 o'clock or 7.
Well, I had 7.
We can decide. We got a couple of months.
Doesn't matter.
And then in December, a Christmas dinner here, program by Kay French. And then we'll start on next year. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.